"This is my ex-husband," replied another female voice, which Matt immediately recognized. Turning his head, he saw his ex-wife decisively making her way to his table. Matt's first thought was, "Damn, what does she want?" Fiona stopped a few steps away from the table. "I know you probably hate me," she began hesitantly. "But can we talk for a minute?" Matt set aside the remains of his sandwich and took off his sunglasses so she could see his eyes, a habit instilled in him by his mother many years ago. "I don't hate you, Fiona," he quietly replied, feeling the tension escalating with each passing second. Matt noticed that Fiona's friends were sitting close enough to overhear their conversation if he spoke loudly. However, he believed that their conversation was not for outsiders. He gestured for Fiona to sit across from him. She sighed and settled on the bench, crossing one leg over the backrest. "I really went off the rails for a while," she confessed. Matt remained silent. From his perspective, it was an undeniable truth, but he didn't feel the need to reiterate his opinion on the matter. Fiona already knew what he thought of her actions. There was a momentary pause. Then Fiona took off her sunglasses, revealing her beautiful green eyes. "How are you, Matt?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Very well, thank you. And you?" "I'm doing well. I'm attending evening school, but you know that. Dad said he told you. I'm planning to apply to Texas University next semester. I want to become a doctor's assistant." "That's great," Matt replied without much enthusiasm. "I'm glad things are working out." He didn't know what else to say. He had no interest in what she was doing. It was no longer his duty to be her support group. "Listen, Matt," Fiona began, leaning forward. "I know I never told you in the chaos how sorry I am for what I did. But I truly regret it. As I have already said, I don't blame you for everything you're going through, but I hope that someday you will find a way to forgive me." "I absolutely do not hate you, Fiona," Matt interrupted. "And I have already forgiven you. I simply don't have the time or energy for hatred. It would consume me alive and give nothing in return. I think if I were angry all the time, it would ruin almost everything else in my life. And life, as they say, is too short." "Well, thank you for that," she replied. Fiona continued to talk about seeing a psychologist and making progress. She spoke about realizing the consequences of her decisions and their impact on other people. Matt nodded but felt his forehead furrow. He restlessly shifted on the hard bench. Fiona noticed his expression and felt his disapproval. "What?" she asked with a hint of irritation in her voice. "I'm trying to apologize and show you that I'm working on myself. I know it's better not to behave as I did before. Fiona, I feel like your psychologist is just wasting your time and your father's money," he said with hints of irritation in his voice. "If that's all she's trying to achieve, then I don't know. Maybe it's just the first step, and she still has work to do," he thought. Matt paused, gathering his thoughts. He tried to choose the right words to convey his point of view. "You see, when you say you won't do something because of the severe consequences, you're essentially conducting a risk analysis. You reason, 'I won't do this because I don't want to get caught and face serious punishment.' But don't you realize that this isn't true honesty?" Fiona looked increasingly dissatisfied. Matt began to doubt if she had truly changed. "I read somewhere that honesty is when you do the right thing even when no one is watching," he continued softly. "Until you reach the point with the psychologist where you simply won't do it because it's wrong, not out of fear of punishment, nothing will change. Sooner or later, you will succumb to temptation again, thinking that in some special circumstances the consequences won't be that scary or no one will find out." Fiona took a deep breath. She was still irritated, but perhaps she was starting to listen. "You see, for me, it's like this," Matt tried to explain his position. "We are all human, we are all imperfect, and every day we face temptations. But if a person cannot instinctively ignore temptation, without even thinking about it or analyzing the risks, then sooner or later it will lead to tragedy." Fiona looked at him, clearly ready to flare up. "Well, I guess I'm just not as perfect as some people," she snapped, distancing herself. But then her expression changed. She tried to calm down. Shaking her head, Fiona took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. "I loved you, Matt," she said, changing the subject. "Believe it or not, I really loved you. And I loved you, Matt replied. I proved it by never betraying you. If she could get so angry, so could he. Fiona nobly wrinkled her brow and looked away. But telling my mom, dad, my brothers and sisters, and everyone we knew, is that what you call love? Fiona said bitterly. He snorted slightly. Isn't that like blaming the victim, Fiona? All I did was shine a light on what you and those idiots were up to. It's like turning over a rock and watching all the slimy creatures scatter, you know? Matt was on edge. He took a deep, deliberate breath, forced himself to relax his jaw muscles and drop his shoulders. And as for how it happened, he said, now completely sincere, I simply followed your lead. Fiona frowned and raised her eyebrows, clearly not expecting this turn in the conversation. Matt looked at Fiona, his ex-wife, with bitterness in his gaze. He reminded her that she herself had spoken about her motives. She was having fun because she could and because it was enjoyable. You didn't care about my feelings. You didn't even think about what I had to go through, did you? She lowered her head and fell silent. Suddenly, Matt felt tired of this conversation that brought back old wounds. He put on his sunglasses, stretched, and stood up. Fiona, perhaps I shouldn't have brought up this topic. It just crossed my mind. I suppose a psychologist would eventually steer the conversation towards a deeper understanding of what happened anyway. I hope I didn't ruin her plans, he said wearily. I must be going. Goodbye. He took a step back to go around the picnic table but stopped and turned back to Fiona. You know, I really did love you very much. But you burned out all my feelings in me in just one day. Nothing is left. All I have is the memory of loving you. I'm sorry, it's all like this. Matt turned abruptly and headed towards the gates leading to the open prairie where his small Cessna plane was parked. Along the way, he disposed of the remaining food in the trash can. He no longer felt like eating, not even that large slice of pecan pie that used to seem tasteless to him. Later, he would regret it, but right now, he just wanted to be as far away from his ex-wife as possible. David didn't know what he wanted to do next in life, but he was certain that flying would be an integral part of his future. He took refresher courses to renew his pilot's license, including instrument ground training, and then spent some time flying with an instructor to regain his skills. Matt's uncle, Jake, his mother's older brother and the man who taught him how to fly, had passed away 6 years ago, leaving all his property to his sister. This included 5 small planes parked behind the so-called North Barn, about 3/4 of a mile from the house. Matt hired 3 aircraft mechanics, who in their spare time brought all 5 airplanes to a condition that met the FAA requirements for airworthiness. It didn't take much time. He paid them for the work, not for the number of hours worked, and paid very well. Therefore, with joyful surprise, the mechanics discovered that they had plenty of free time to work on Matt's airplanes. The 5 single-engine airplanes easily passed inspection, and Matt began selling them to dealers, except one, which he sold to a guy with a private pilot license who wanted to fly more and not pay exorbitant prices for renting airplanes. Matt offered him a particularly favorable deal because this guy reminded him of himself. He didn't make much money selling Uncle Jake's airplanes, but he didn't expect to, nor did he need to. In the end, he was left with only 1 airplane, and he didn't even try to sell it. Matt loved taking it up in the air and spending an hour or 2 alone with the airplane. One hot August day, Matt sat at a picnic table in the shade of a huge pecan tree near an old, dilapidated building with a small sign identifying the place as Jesse's. For the locals who frequented the place, no further description was needed. Jesse was an elderly African-American man who looked as if he had just been freed from slavery by Sherman's cavalry passing by the plantation on their way east from Atlanta. No one knew how old he really was, but it didn't matter. Jesse served the best barbecue in the world, although only the locals and select people from town knew about it. Despite the midday heat, being under the sprawling branches of the tall pecan tree with a gentle breeze was quite pleasant. A light trail of fragrant smoke rose from the smoker in the backyard, whetting the appetite for miles around. Despite the apparent abandonment of the place, inside and out, it was so clean that one could literally eat off the floor. Matt came here as often as he could, as this place lay on the best route between the big city and his parents' home, which had now become his own. He couldn't quite get used to the fact that this new home now belonged to him. Today, Matt wasn't going anywhere. He just wanted to taste some good old Texas brisket, so he used Uncle Jake's last plane, the old Cessna 172, to get to Jesse's establishment. Finishing a huge brisket sandwich, barbecue sauce still dripping, Matt gazed thoughtfully at the horizon, where the outlines of distant hills could be seen. He pondered his future, how his life had changed over the past years. Plates of borracho beans and mustard potato salad stood nearby. He contemplated going back inside for a big slice of pecan pie that Jesse made every day. Matt convinced himself that with his active lifestyle, an extra piece of pie wouldn't harm his figure. Lost in his thoughts, Matt paid no attention to what was happening around him. He vaguely noticed the movement on the worn two-lane road to his left. The shimmering heat waves rising from the asphalt caused a headache. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw several cars pulling into the parking lot with young people, but he didn't pay it any mind. Suddenly, snatches of conversation from nearby tables reached his ears. "Are you really going to approach that cowboy?" asked an unfamiliar female voice. Matt became wary. Besides old shorts, a faded shirt, and sturdy boots, he wore a cream Stetson cowboy hat. But in rural Texas, many wore such headgear. When Matt first thought of flying to Jesse's ranch to avoid the hour-long drive on winding Texas roads, he tried to find the owner of the pasture on the other side of the barbed wire. He wanted to obtain permission to land his Cessna on this territory, but he couldn't find the woman who, according to the county tax records, owned this land. So, he simply used the prairie as his personal airstrip, leaving the question of landing rights for later. If the landowner comes with a complaint, he will stop using this grassy piece of land and offer sincere apologies. Jesse's plot was separated from the wide expanse of prairie by a barbed wire fence with 15-foot gates, located no more than 30 yards from the main entrance to Jesse's house. The gates were probably installed long ago for loading and unloading cattle from trucks. They were made of galvanized tubular steel, but over the years, the hinges and locking mechanism had rusted. When Matt first thought of flying to Jesse's, he inspected the gates, identified the issues, and bought spare parts. Now, as he walked towards the plane, Matt felt the weight of the past gradually lifting off his shoulders. Ahead of him awaited the boundless sky and freedom from painful memories. Matt spent almost a whole day, alone, repairing the gates. Now they swung smoothly on the hinges and had a reliable locking mechanism. He noticed a woman leaning on the gates. She was of medium height, slender, with black hair and a caramel complexion. Matt approached cautiously, not wanting to startle the stranger. He introduced himself to her, and soon they struck up a conversation. "What a funny little plane," she said, turning her face towards him. Her crystal blue eyes laughed at him from under her sunglasses. "Yes, but it flies straight and gets to places much faster than a racing car," Matt replied, unable to contain his smile. They chatted, discussing the plane, the sky, barbecues, anything that came to mind. Matt was proud of himself for being able to engage in an intelligent conversation with this beautiful woman. "Are you a pilot?" she asked. "Yes," he confirmed. "You don't look like a pilot," she remarked, looking him up and down. "My pilot suit is currently at the dry cleaners." Along with Superman's suit and Batman's cape, Matt joked. She lightly slapped his hand and moved closer to him. Or did he move closer to her? Her touch was gentle. Matt wanted more. "Do you want to go for a ride?" he asked, hoping for a positive response. "Go for a ride? You want me to fly in your little plane?" she asked sweetly. It seemed like she had been waiting for this offer for a long time. Matt pondered. Could this mean that their thoughts are moving in the same direction? His heart beat faster in anticipation of her answer. "Of course," he replied. "I have a Mustang at the ranch. We can get there in 20 minutes by plane and I'll take you for a ride." The girl looked into his eyes, then turned away and headed towards a group of young people who had just arrived. It turned out they were her friends. "Julie!" she shouted at the top of her lungs. She had excellent lungs. Matt thought she could be heard even by truck drivers a mile away. A petite brunette with a full bust emerged from the crowd. "Throw me my things, I'm flying on a plane," the girl shouted. The leather clutch immediately flew through the air and landed a few meters away from the girl. Picking up the purse, the girl returned to Matt with a leisurely stride. She took out her phone and, staring at the screen, dialed a number. "Steffi? Hi, it's Mercy. I'm flying on a plane with the cowboy." "Yes, on a plane. We're flying to his ranch, okay?" Matt watched her with interest. "So, her name is Mercy. But who is Steffi?" "Yes, I'll be fine," Mercy continued, looking Matt in the eyes. "It will be fun. Yes, cowboy is very sweet." "No, you don't know him." Sensing someone on the other end of the line was worried, Matt approached her and smiled. He enjoyed being around this girl. She exuded a pleasant scent. He took out his wallet and showed Mercy his pilot's license. "Stefani, enough chattering, damn it," Mercy said irritably. "Listen. Write this down, Mom. I know you're worried, but listen, okay? Do you have something to write with?" A short pause followed. Mercy rolled her eyes and impatiently shook her head. She took off her sunglasses to read Matt's ID. He finally managed to admire her beautiful blue eyes, cute nose with barely visible freckles, high cheekbones, and plump lips that seemed so kissable. After finishing the tense conversation, the girl switched her attention to Matt. "That wasn't my mother, it was my roommate Stephanie," Mercy explained, noticing David's questioning look. "Although sometimes she acts like a real mom." David nodded, trying to hide his growing concern. Why did she need to share his information with someone? He tried to push away those thoughts and focus on the flight. "If I understand correctly, your full name is Mercedes?" he asked, starting the engine. "Yes," the girl said modestly. "Are you okay if I call you that?" She remained silent, and David took it as agreement. He handed her the headphones and began the system check, trying not to dwell on the strange phone call and what might lie ahead. The plane lifted off the ground, soaring into the sky. David made a wide circle, flying over Jesse's restaurant where Mercedes' friends were gathered. He felt a spark igniting between him and Mercedes. Something told him that this flight could change his life. Mercedes desperately waved at them from the right seat. Matt increased the thrust and circled above them so they could clearly see Mercedes and wave back. Then he leveled the plane on a southern course and, after a minute, gained altitude again, flying over Jesse's restaurant. Matt waved goodbye several times, gradually gaining height. He leveled the plane at a height to avoid bird collisions but not to appear on the controller's radars. During the flight, they started talking again. Matt decided to relax a bit and asked, "If you don't mind, Miss Mercedes, you are the first Latina with blue eyes that I've met." "No offense." She shot him a quick glance. "I'm not Latina, and I don't speak Spanish," she playfully remarked, slightly frowning. "I apologize," Matt said, looking at her. "I didn't mean to offend you." She looked at him with feigned disdain, then burst into laughter. "Sir, you are in the presence of a true Cheyenne woman, and the Cheyenne people are Native Americans." Matt studied her facial features for a long moment, then smiled. "All right, Miss Cheyenne Warrior. For a historical project, I read diaries about Native Americans from the early 18th century, and I don't recall any mention of Cheyenne girls with blue eyes." He paused to check the instruments, then gestured towards the horizon again. "So let's be honest," he continued. "Your Cheyenne warriors must have Celtic blood." Mercedes stuck out her tongue but smiled. "Maybe I have Irish origins?" she joked. "Ah," Matt nodded with mock wisdom. "So, Daddy was counting on a wandering Irish girl, roaming the wilds." "Is this by any chance the wilds of Cheyenne, Wyoming?" "No. Philadelphia," she calmly replied. "And Mom says she ambushed the poor wandering Cheyenne warrior and captured him fairly and squarely. She says she took pity on him and made him hers." Matt laughed, imagining the verbal war between her parents. His own parents often engaged in similar verbal duels. "I think I would have enjoyed treating your parents to a cup of coffee and having a pleasant chat with them." Later, Mercedes asked about Fiona when Matt mentioned her. He told her a bit about the circumstances of his divorce from Fiona and what they had talked about at Jess's shortly before he saw Mercedes. Matt said that all memories of his marriage and divorce were securely locked away in a secluded corner of his mind. He explained that he was comfortable with it. His ex-wife now meant no more to him than any other woman at the table full of yuppies. Mercedes recalled that Julie, her second cousin who invited her and Stephanie to Texas, worked with Fiona but wasn't particularly close to her. "What a small world," said Matt, after which they changed the subject. Mercedes inquired how Matt learned to fly. He told her about his uncle Jake, who taught him the basics of piloting and helped him make his first solo flight at the young age of 15. Time flew by unnoticed in the lively conversation. Matt was focused on flying the plane but couldn't take his eyes off the beautiful girl from the Cheyenne tribe. The ranch appeared on the horizon faster than Matt expected. Matt steered the Cessna towards a well-trodden patch of prairie that served as the runway. He explained to Mercedes about the windward and leeward sides. As they flew into the wind and sharply turned to the right, Matt prepared the old plane for a perfect landing on its three-wheel landing gear. They taxied to a large barn where tie-down straps and chocks were stored. Together, they securely fastened the plane against the strong winds, which were a common occurrence in the vast expanses of Texas. Mercedes helped as much as she could. Finishing up, Matt led her through a spacious passageway on the side of the barn to the other side, where the house was visible 100 yards away. "All right," said Mercedes, looking around. She pointed to the house, near the back porch of which Matt's Range Rover was parked. "And where's that Mustang you mentioned?" "Oh, there it is," replied Matt, abruptly changing direction and heading towards the pen where a small herd of horses gathered by the fence. They were already watching Matt and Mercedes approach, expecting some treats. Matt didn't have any apples with him, but the horses were unaware of that. "Here she is," he said, pointing to a 3-year-old chestnut filly who danced around as if understanding she was the subject of discussion. "Hey, Ginger!" exclaimed Matt, reaching out his left hand. She willingly approached and sniffed his palm in search of something sweet. "Allow me to introduce you to Ginger. Ginger, this is Miss Mercedes Cheyenne, a warrior princess and simply a good person," he said, introducing them to each other. Ginger tossed her head and snorted. Mercedes, on the other hand, tried to hold back her laughter. "What?" Matt asked in complete bewilderment. He had no idea what he had done to be so funny. He couldn't take his eyes off Mercedes, whose smile seemed to light up everything around her. Matt nervously checked his zipper, making sure everything was in order. Chuckling, Mercedes explained that she thought he was talking about a Mustang car, not a horse. Matt laughed and told her about his first Mustang, caught in Nevada. "I would love to see you riding her, galloping with your hair flying," he said with a smile. Suddenly it dawned on him, "You do know how to ride, Cheyenne maiden?" Mercedes confirmed with a smirk that she learned horseback riding from her grandfather during summer vacations. However, she refused to ride in her shorts, fearing she might chafe her legs. Matt agreed. He didn't want her smooth cream-colored thighs to suffer. He pondered how to solve this problem but decided to suggest a drive through the prairies for now. The girl agreed. She approvingly patted his chest. Matt, in turn, happily noted how pleasant it was to be around her. They stopped at his parents' old house, loaded a few bottles of water into the Range Rover, and set off for a ride. They drove across the vast prairie, stretching far beyond Matt's ranch. No one claimed ownership of these lands, and Matt took the opportunity to graze his cattle there. Soon they passed by his herd, lazily moving towards the water. Matt told Mercedes about the history of these places, ancient ruins, and bison. The girl listened with interest, absorbing every word. "I promise to show you these ruins someday," Matt said, looking into her shining eyes. When they returned to the old house, the shadows had already thickened. Matt showed Mercedes the house where he lived as a teenager and the field where he used to run. Memories flooded over him like a wave, and he realized how much his life had changed. Stopping at the main house, Matt turned off the engine and turned to Mercedes. His heart was pounding as he spoke. "Mercedes, I don't want to take you back to the city. I feel so good with you here. But I don't want you to feel like a captive. So the decision is yours." Mercedes looked at him attentively, as if trying to read his thoughts. "What do you want?" she asked softly. "I want to light the grill and cook a steak with salad for you for dinner," Matt replied without hesitation. The girl pondered. Then Matt told Mercedes about all his plans for the evening. Mercedes looked at him carefully and smiled slowly. She took out her phone and called Steffi, informing her that she would stay at the ranch for the night or longer. Turning to Matt, Mercedes asked seriously, "Cowboy? Matt? Can we go inside and find that lovely bathroom you showed me earlier?" "Of course," he replied, pulling the door handle. "Last one to the bathroom has to wait," Matt shouted, running off. Mercedes made an indistinct noise, trying to open the door. They raced up the wide steps to the porch, and Matt pushed the door as fast as he could. Mercedes laughed and tried to grab his hand to slow him down, but Matt was bigger and stronger. He won the race to the downstairs bathroom but lost the race to the large bathroom upstairs. Matt was raised with the rule, ladies first, and truly lived by that principle. Otherwise, his mom would scold him. He heard the bathroom door upstairs slam shut, then silence fell. After the bath, Matt and Mercedes started preparing dinner. Matt knew how to cook on the stove, but preferred grilling outdoors. Mercedes loved greens, so they divided the responsibilities. While Matt was lighting the coals and grilling steaks, Mercedes rummaged in the fridge for vegetables, prepared a wonderful salad and vinaigrette sauce. She carried the salad out to the terrace, set out the plates and cutlery, while Matt tended to the steaks. Occasionally, they brushed hips, passing each other in the kitchen. Several times they patted each other on the shoulder or hand, just to touch each other, chatting about trivial matters. It had been a long time since Matt had someone to share such pleasant moments with. He realized he really liked it, and thought Mercedes did too. Mercedes placed their plates next to each other, not opposite, and that's how they had dinner. They quietly conversed in the gathering dusk, not discussing anything important, just two people getting to know each other. Despite only knowing each other for a few hours, they felt incredibly comfortable together, easily exchanging ideas and opinions, and occasionally touching each other. After clearing the table and loading the dishwasher, they moved to two lounge chairs on the terrace. Matt had already moved them closer to each other, leaving only a few centimeters between them, and Mercedes didn't mind. Matt and Mercedes gazed at the night sky for a long time, inventing names for constellations they couldn't recognize. They speculated whether the silvery light streaking across the sky was a space station or a UFO. However, they didn't really care. When it got a bit cooler, they gathered their things and headed back to the house. At the door, Mercedes suddenly stopped and turned to Matt. I'm not sure. I've never done this on a first date," she said softly, looking into his eyes. "It's okay," Matt replied, feeling his heart beat faster. "I suggest you don't think of it as a first date." Later they went to bed. The air around them was electrified with unexpressed emotions. The next morning they enjoyed a hearty breakfast of bacon and scrambled eggs with chatty toast and jam. Matt learned that Mercedes was supposedly a member of the North American Meat Eaters Association, which he had never heard of. He speculated that she was indeed a true predator, considering how quickly she devoured the steak last night and just finished all the remaining bacon on the table. Mercedes admitted that such a group did not actually exist. Matt suggested creating it, and in response, Mercedes sat on his lap and kissed him. He was on cloud nine with happiness. After breakfast, dressed only in one of Matt's t-shirts, Mercedes called her friend Stephanie. While they chatted, Matt, pulling on his jeans and boots, took care of household chores. He took out the trash to the fire pit behind the shed and swept the stable. Returning to the house and grabbing a soda can from the fridge, Matt suddenly realized that he knew how to fulfill his promise and get Mercy to ride a horse after all. "Mom's things," he exclaimed. "She left them all here." Matt explained the situation with the ranch to Mercedes. Then he suggested she try on his mom's jeans to go horseback riding. They ran upstairs, and Mercedes began rummaging through Matt's mother's old closet in search of suitable pants. Meanwhile, Matt decided to video call his mom to ask for permission to borrow the jeans. "Hello, dear," his mom greeted him when the connection was established. "I was just thinking about you. How are you?" Matt took a deep breath, preparing to tell his mom about the unexpected events of the past few days. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a noise coming from his mom's closet. Turning around, he saw his girlfriend Mercedes pulling out a large box from there. Matt returned to the conversation with his mother, who was now talking about the National Monument meteor crater. "Isn't Winslow, Arizona mentioned in some song?" his mother asked. Without hesitation, Matt replied, "Yes, in the Eagles song, Take It Easy." It was released in 1972. His mother was delighted by his knowledge, unaware that her son had simply quickly Googled the information on his phone. Meanwhile, Mercedes caught Matt's attention, showing him something she found in the closet. His jaw dropped when he saw fur handcuffs and restraints in her hands. "Mom, what's this?" Matt asked with a smirk, showcasing the find in front of the laptop camera. "Damn it, Tom. I thought you cleaned out the closet," exclaimed the mother, addressing Matt's father, who was out of the camera's view. "No, you said you would take your box and put it in the van yourself, dear. Remember?" the father succinctly replied. Matt's mother blushed and tried to explain, "Well, dear, sometimes moms and dads can be quite playful." Matt interrupted her, "Mom, I know about birds and bees, okay?" After a long pause, the mother sighed, "Matt, dear, your father and we are older than you. But we are not dead. And we enjoy our games, you understand?" The situation became increasingly awkward when Mercedes handed Matt a double harness. He brought it closer to the camera. "And what's this, Mom?" "Well, darn," the mother began, glancing towards where Matt's father likely was. "Tom, you should have reminded me about this box, darn it." Matt continued to tease his mother, relishing in her embarrassment. He realized he didn't know much about his parents, but understood they were a lively, loving, and evidently adventurous couple. Matt recalled one incident. When Aunt Janet came over and stayed the night, he asked, suddenly realizing that Janet wasn't his real aunt, but just a close friend of his mother. Perhaps even closer than he had ever imagined. Matt's mother, Leah, mumbled something incoherent. Her silence neither confirmed nor denied, only fueling the young man's suspicions. Wow, Matt couldn't believe it. "So when you sent me to the cabin for Dad's birthday, all of you—" "Don't be rude, David," his mother sternly warned. "I won't, Mom," he promised. "But why?" "Because I have rules, young man. When your father is pleased, so am I," Leah replied with unexpected frankness. Matt was speechless. His mind was shaken by this revelation. Suddenly, Leah called out to someone, "Hello, dear. Is my son treating you well?" Matt was bewildered. Mercedes was not visible in the frame, and she remained silent. How could his mother know that someone was with him? "Son," Leah said reproachfully, "remember that my full-length mirror is right behind you?" Matt turned around and saw the old mirror that his mother kept in the bedroom. It was angled perfectly, reflecting Mercedes. With a heavy sigh, Matt realized that the situation was becoming more complicated. "Mom, meet Mercedes." "Mercedes, this is my mom," he introduced them to each other. Mercedes waved to the mirror, then turned and brought her face closer to Matt so the camera could capture her. "Hello, Mrs. Singletary," she cheerfully said. Leah chuckled. "Dear, after overhearing that conversation, I think we don't need to be so formal. Call me Leia." "Yes, like in Star Wars," she added with a smile. While Leia and Mercedes chatted, Matt stepped back a bit. He was almost certain that his mother couldn't see his left hand caressing the inside of Mercedes' right thigh. But he wasn't sure if he needed to hide something like that. Suddenly, his father's face appeared in the frame. He greeted Mercedes and then disappeared from view. The last thing Matt saw was his father's head disappearing below. Leia leaned back slightly, grabbed the edge of the table, then leaned forward again. "Mom, is that Dad?" Matt asked. "Darling, I think it's time for me to go, okay?" Leia said uncertainly, glancing at Mercedes. "Nice to meet you, sweetheart. Be happy," she shouted as a final remark before tapping her finger on the keyboard. The image disappeared, leaving Matt and Mercedes in silence. Matt closed the laptop and looked at Mercedes. He was amazed, but not worried. "You know, I think Mom wouldn't say anything to me if they used their toys with you and Dad," Matt smiled. "Are you sure?" She playfully smiled and sat on Matt's lap. "Absolutely," he replied. The experiments in bed by Matt and Mercy only strengthened their emotional connection. It seemed like it would always be like this, but everything changed on Thursday. "Darling," Matt, Mercedes quietly called out during breakfast. She had been silent since the morning, and Matt could see that something was bothering her. "Yes?" he confidently replied, expecting to find out what the problem was. "You remember Stephanie, right?" "Well, yes, your friend," Matt nodded. Mercedes nervously swallowed. Can we invite her to stay with us? You don't mind, do you?" Matt was stunned. He and Mercedes got along perfectly, both in bed and beyond. They performed morning duties on the farm together, cooked, walked, rode horses, and enjoyed each other's company. At least that's how it seemed to Matt. Why would she invite someone who could complicate their relationship? On the other hand, the question was about Stephanie staying with them, not just with Mercedes. It was an interesting way to phrase the situation. Of course, Matt replied evenly. There was no point in creating obstacles. If Mercedes didn't want to be alone with him, it wouldn't happen anyway, so it was better to accept the situation as it was. Mercedes' face immediately brightened. "Thank you, darling. I'll call her, okay?" "Of course." She took his hand as soon as the connection was established and pulled him towards her. She didn't want him to leave while she was talking to her friend. Matt saw this as a good sign. "Hello, Steffi," Mercedes greeted her friend. The cowboy said yes, so everything's fine. The conversation continued, and Matt listened as Mercedes discussed the details of Stephanie's arrival. She mentioned games in the living room with a wooden floor, horses, and even an airplane. Mercedes rolled her eyes, looking at Matt, as Stephanie, apparently, began to chatter too excitedly. Stephanie, lower your voice. Listen to me, woman. Just pack a few things. No, you won't need much. We are quite, well, clothing is not necessary, okay?" Matt noticed that Mercedes once again said, "we," referring to both of them. Suddenly, a thought came to Matt's mind. He waved his hand to get Mercedes' attention. "Wait a minute, Steph," Mercedes said into the phone. "Does she know how to get here?" Matt asked. Mercedes sighed in annoyance and shook her head. Matt smiled. "If she can make it to McCready Aerodrome, we can pick her up in the Cessna." "What do you think?" he suggested. Matt began giving directions on how to get to the location, but Mercedes interrupted him. "She has GPS." Mercedes dictated Stephanie's address and turned to Matt. "When?" she asked. "How soon can she be there?" Matt glanced at the wall clock and nodded. "In a couple of hours." The anticipation weighed on Matt as he and Mercy prepared for Stephanie's arrival. He couldn't help but wonder how Stephanie's arrival would affect his and Mercedes' idyllic stay at the ranch. Stephanie arrived a little later than 2 hours. Upon meeting her, Matt and Mercedes immediately took her on a grand tour of the house and the surroundings. Matt introduced her to Ginger and his horse, which his father had named Haas many years ago. The girls spent most of the day by the pool, discussing recent events in their lives. Mercedes skillfully engaged Matt in conversation, directing it in a way that Stephanie and Matt could get to know each other better. The next 2 weeks passed in pleasant company. In the mornings, they helped with the household chores and then set off on adventures. They swam in the pool, rode jet skis on the lake, and came up with all sorts of entertainment. Matt spent just over 3 weeks with Mercedes, 1 week alone and 2 more together with Stephanie. Those were some of the best weeks of his life. However, at times Matt noticed how Stephanie looked at him when he flirted with Mercedes. He realized that for Stephanie, Mercedes meant much more than just a friend. Once he accidentally caught them kissing behind the shed, and everything became clear to him. On the eve of the girls' departure, Matt and Mercedes decided to simply be together and embrace each other. Parting was not easy for them. "You understand why I asked Steffi to come here, right?" Mercedes quietly asked in the darkness of the bedroom, only disturbed by the faint moonlight from the window. Matt nodded. Steffi's lesbian tendencies. "She needed to understand that there was nothing serious between us," Matt added. I'm sorry it turned out this way," Mercedes said with sadness and regret. "I'm not angry with you," Matt said softly. Mercedes sighed, and Matt remained silent. Do you remember our times with Steffi, the dances, and why I have to leave? Mercedes asked. I remember. You grew up together, started dancing at 4 years old. And since then, you've spent most of your life preparing for the tour with the troupe in Philadelphia. And I understand that special feelings could not help but arise between you. I saw you behind the shed. Mercedes was taken aback. I didn't want you to see that. Mercedes forced out. It's okay, merci. I understand everything. He hugged her tighter. You know, I really enjoyed being here with you. Maybe I should reconsider everything. I could stay with you and find. Mercedes suddenly said. And Steffi? How will she react to this? I will explain everything to her. She will understand. Matt sighed heavily. No, darling, Matt interrupted her. In Philadelphia, you have better opportunities than here. I can't take away your lifelong dream. That wouldn't be fair. I will remember every moment spent with you, Mercedes sincerely said. Tears welled up in her eyes. Silence hung in the room, filled with unspoken feelings and regrets about what could have been. We wouldn't have been able to be together anyway, he whispered softly. Mercedes looked at him sadly. After the girls left, Matt felt lost. The pain of parting was unbearable. To distract himself, he immersed himself in the affairs of selling the ranch. Matt sold all the cattle, horses, and bisons. Particularly touching was the moment when he gave 2 horses to the Ingram family. Their daughters, Amber and Pamela, couldn't hold back tears of joy as they hugged Matt. After selling all the equipment at auction, Matt gifted his Uncle Jake's old plane to his friend Gina for flight school. Alone in the empty house, Matt filled the pool with rocks and soil. He didn't want any more reminders of the happy days spent here with Mercedes. Matt walked through the house one last time, carefully checking every corner. He wanted to make sure nothing important was left behind, other than what Mercedes discovered during his video call with his mother. After obtaining all the necessary permits for a controlled burn, Matt set fire to the old ranch and the small house where he had lived as a teenager with a heavy heart. He knew it was time to start fresh. The local volunteer fire brigade stood by as the fire consumed the buildings. Matt threw a barbecue party for them, ordering ribs, brisket, and other dishes from Jesse. The firefighters happily ate, drank soda, and socialized until they were sought after by worried spouses and loved ones. That night, Matt stayed in a motel, feeling completely detached from the past. If you're over 18, don't miss the upcoming story and remember to click the like button to show your support. Thank you.